You're listening to BreakPoint This Week, where we're talking about the top stories of the week from a Christian worldview. Today we're going to talk about marrying earlier and romance in the church, which is fitting for Valentine's Day week. We're also going to talk about the escalating situation between Russia and Ukraine and how we should think about that as Christians and what the religious landscape looks like in that part of the world. We have a lot to get to today, but thanks for being with us. Stick around. Welcome to BreakPoint This Week from the Colson Center for Christian Worldview. I'm Maria Baer, alongside John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center and the voice of BreakPoint. John, I'm just in an extremely grumpy mood this morning, so you're going to have to carry us here today. I'm just
because of Cincinnati's loss.
Oh, I don't care about that. Actually, I was kind of happy about that, to be honest with you.
Really? You're in Ohio. Like that was supposed to be
how shallow
like
I
all
am.
hands on deck.
No, this is how shallow I am. I went to a Cincinnati game earlier this season because they played the Packers. My husband is a Packers fan because he was born in Milwaukee. And the parking garage, the structures down by the stadium in Cincinnati are so outdated. Like the planning is so poor. It took us to get out of the stadium and on the highway. It took almost 3 hours. And so I hold that personally against the team. I'm not going to say the team name because last time I said it, you made fun of me and we got all kinds of emails about how I say it wrong.
Because the last time you said it, you referred to an 80s rock band of all women.
The Bengal Tigers. The Bengals.
That's better.
Okay. Well,
my favorite part of that memory was not only that you said it wrong, but that you assured me that Aaron would be on your side on this, and he wasn't.
I called him afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, you said it wrong for years." I'm like, "What?" He's just stopped pointing those things out to me because I get so belligerent about it. But
are you one of those people that get the lyrics wrong to songs too?
I have no comment on that.
Wrong?
I have no comment.
Oh.
If I do,
that's what my wife does.
If I do, all I'll say is that whatever I came up with is probably better than what the song actually says. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, I can't make a comment on that. I can say that what my wife comes up with is often just bizarre. And I'm like, why would you think that's
what kids do?
The lyrics.
So
oh my goodness. Yeah.
We're huge on Encanto.
It's really all over the place.
We're huge on Encanto in my house right now. I don't know if your kids have gotten into it. This is the new Disney movie. My daughters are absolutely obsessed.
I've heard of it. my daughters watched it, I think, but I don't think
it's cute. It's cute. But
it's good.
The music is by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So it's a lot of really fast. I mean, it's, he's a rap artist more or less. I mean, he's more talented than that, but it's a lot of really fast lyrics. And so the girls just have, I know, sorry, he's a genius, etc. All I mean to say is that... No, I'm talking about where you
were like, you said he's a rap artist. Well, actually, he's a better talent than that. like rap artist equals not talented.
Oh my God. Okay.
Please address all of your musical, especially all the fans.
I'm saying
especially all the fans of the Super Bowl halftime show. All the Gen Xers that listen to our program that thought this was the greatest one ever. You can address all of your complaints directly to Maria.
People are throwing their shoes.
But please tell me why you're grumpy. We're off topic.
That's because of the weather. No, I was just going to say that in Encanto, my girls can't tell what they're saying. And so hearing what they've come up with to fill in the words and the syllables is like the highlight of my day. It's so funny. They have lots of different ideas. No, I'm grumpy because we had a taste this week. Some warm front blew through and it was 60 degrees 2 days ago. Like we were not wearing coats. It was a whole thing. I was about to get out our little kiddie pool in the backyard. And I'm kidding on that front. But it was really warm. And then last night, I woke up this morning and it's snowing. And it's not cute anymore. The snow's cute when it's November, but it's officially uncute.
We're about to have 3 days beginning of next week of 0 degrees.
Ew.
We are having another, we always have that around January. But when it hits this late in February, even if it's going to snow here back and forth between now and May. But it'll be 70 and 60 and 40 and, and then it'll drop down. But gosh, 3 days of zero temperature, that's just terrible. Yeah.
I don't know why you have to one-up me because I wanted you to feel bad for me because of the weather here, but now you have to show that it's worse for you.
Well,
I don't even know what to say to that.
You can one-up me most other times of the year because Ohio is gloomy and rainy and you're dodging tornadoes and stuff like that. Colorado, when I complain, it doesn't actually feel legitimate. Like yesterday, seriously, woke up to 8 inches of snow.
Snow, right?
And we got pummeled. I drove back from the airport in it, and then I got out, shoveled and plowed, my driveway was completely cleared and dry by noon because we have incredible sun here. So the sun just kills it.
Yeah.
But you don't have sun. Your sun disappears and doesn't come back for months at a time.
This is becoming an attack.
And listen, you and I are complaining about this. Wayne is listening to this from his paradise.
He told me this morning.
South Dakota or North Dakota.
He's in Minnesota, dude. You got to get it right.
Oh, right. I always forget that because the one time I went up to speak at a school that Wayne used to work at, you have to fly into Fargo, which is North Dakota.
Oh, sure.
That's the only way to get there.
So he told me this morning.
Fergus Falls, Minnesota. We shouldn't probably telegraph where he lives because in case he has any enemies.
His family alone makes up like half the population of the town. He told me today that they have a ground blizzard warning. So this is where it's so windy. It's not going to snow from the sky, but the wind on the ground is going to blow around so fiercely. That's just so hardcore, man.
You guys had that conversation this morning, and you launched today's program by complaining about the weather.
Listen, it's hard for me.
Read the room, Maria. Read the room.
Everyone should feel bad for me primarily, and then you guys maybe a little bit, but I don't like the snow.
Maybe we should get to our program.
We should get to it. Okay, I want to start by talking through some of the commentaries this week, and obviously, I think it's safe to say the theme of our week was love and romance. John, we had a lot to say about love and romance.
It was Valentine's Day.
Fitting. It was Valentine's Day. Yeah.
But this is interesting, actually. But before you get to that, this is really interesting because do you remember? I don't know, like what your experience was in youth groups. Growing up.
Very romantic. So much romance.
I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about like how, really the big worry was dating too early. And this was like, don't date, choose to court instead or whatever, don't date. We've entered an era where I think especially college groups are trying to encourage their students to date because dating doesn't happen anymore. It's like use the app, skip right to a physical relationship or, kind of be isolated and by yourself and don't get married until you're, mid 30s after living together four or five times before that. This is a really bad idea. I mean, it's interesting how what we actually talked about, one of our commentaries was how the church needs to take seriously an opportunity to encourage dating in a sense. And I don't mean like the worst side of dating, but I mean encourage relationships. I remember this, the weekend that Chuck Colson collapsed in 2012 at the Wilberforce weekend. We were having this big thing in Virginia. It was a lot of fun with the dark cloud of Chuck's health problems hanging over the event. But Maggie Gallagher, who has been a kind of a warrior for marriage for a long time, Maggie actually just issued this command and said, "This is going to be one of the callings of the church. If you have singles in your church, have them over, play matchmaker, do it, because our culture has lost places where this can actually take place." And that's actually what we encouraged. I know I jumped ahead 2 scripts, but that's actually what we encouraged on the Valentine's Day BreakPoint.
Yeah, that was awesome. I wonder if the difference is not so much that we don't focus on the importance of dating or courting or getting together with people of the opposite sex, but it's more that we've lost like a good definition of what dating is. Because I have a feeling if you talk to, maybe my youth group was kind of on the cusp of it, but like we had a concept of dating that I would say does not necessarily coincide with like the more official definition that maybe you and I are thinking of now, where it's like, if you just say that you're an item, and you're 16, 17, 18, then you're dating, even if you never actually go on dates together alone, the two of you. And it's just kind of all immature and nebulous and that sort of thing. And so maybe I think that's the sort of thing that at least my youth group was maybe trying to caution against because it inevitably led to bad behavior.
And the physical side of things too. I mean, that was, obviously that was a big deal. But no, what I'm hearing, I had this conversation with a headmaster at a Christian school maybe a year and a half ago. He says, they can't get people to come out and support their sports teams.
Really?
Their kids, when they're 16, don't learn how to drive.
Yeah. I've seen that too.
And I don't think any of these things in and of themselves are good or bad or whatever. But when you add them all together, it's that digital life has replaced real life. Digital life is another way to be disembodied. And dating apps are another way to really separate the physical relationship from the whole person. And then and it was interesting, things like experiment dating, basically just having a long distance relationship with someone you'll never meet on the other side of the world, because you don't have to risk anything. But anyway, this is a real dearth. It's like when we hear these stats. I heard it again this week. Hey, good news. The teen pregnancy rate is down. It is down, and that is good news in the sense that it necessarily leads to less abortions. That doesn't mean that teenagers are less sexually broken,
right?
And because either of pornography or abuse. I mean, we still have these incredible abuse numbers, all kinds of things. And our increasingly kind of disembodied society and that sort of thing. I mean, that was actually a real theme this week. We talked about the church and the metaverse as well. But the disembodied nature of life today and how digital technology stops being a tool and starts being a replacement and a distraction, it affects these areas. And one of those is marriage. That's why we have the average age at first marriage being kind of pushed almost to the 30s right now, which isn't a healthy way to live on average. I'm not saying that everyone should get married when they're 17 or 20. What I'm saying is that there's a real myth about this, that marriage is this somehow, kind of this capstone of life, and it's a bucket list item, and you should only do it when you're absolutely ready. And what it means to be absolutely ready has changed from what it used to be. Totally. And so what ends up happening is we don't have a whole lot of marriages taking place.
Yeah, which has effects for everybody, for the entire society and culture at large. What's interesting is a lot of times things like dating apps and new technology, they're always sold to us as this is going to take something that already exists, so like the culture of romantic relationships, and just improve it. It's just going to meet people where they're at and make this easier, and communication is easier. And now, you guys referenced in that piece, I think, which I'd never heard of this, but there's apparently a site or an app called Plenty of Fish. And you can hear the idea is that now you don't have to just fish in the pond of your town or your church. You can go, the whole world over and do it. But as you guys pointed out, I think in this commentary, but also in the commentary about church and the metaverse, the way you communicate a message affects the message, right? So making dating apps a part of the process will change how we view the process altogether. And this is how you get things like, well, I have a relationship with someone that I've never actually met. And so all the attendant risks of living in close proximity to somebody are gone. And then the relationship is not real. That's not how it works. Yeah. And that's not how it becomes a marriage.
Right.
Yeah, it's super interesting.
It's important to note that many dating apps have gotten a lot better. And in other words, kind of trying to say, okay, the reality of this and meeting online is still legitimate. We're just going to make it better. And they have made it better. I mean, we talked about those apps that don't feature first and foremost just physical appearance and, create context to get to know you and things like that. I mean, that's better than just, hookup apps, right? I mean, and I know lots of folks that have met through, digital dating and have ended up marrying and having a long-term relationship. So it does happen. Yeah.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. I mean, how you use it is important as well, obviously. I mean, I have more than one couple in our lives who met that way. But there's usually they chose to only connect with people that were in proximity to them. And then after a certain, amount of communication on the apps, they do meet in person and all that kind of stuff. So it can definitely be used well. It's not an evil thing in and of itself, but it has changed the landscape and the way we look at it for sure. Well, let's talk about too, in that same vein, we're recording this on Friday morning, and this morning you shared a commentary about Summit Ministries, which I thought was really neat. Just that study you referenced was fascinating. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, Summit is something, obviously, folks who listen know I've been connected with them for a really long time, just a real big fan. And it'll be something that we take advantage of for our kids, even though I still teach there several times during the summer programs. But it's interesting. Summit goes back now, I think almost 60 years. And the overall model is a model that has proven to be remarkably effective. in changing the trajectory of one's life. Now, everybody goes to summer camp and says, that changed my life. Typically, it's 3 days, 4 days, or a week, and there's a camp high, and then it changes. For some, it's been different.
And you have your camp girlfriend and your camp
boyfriend.
Yeah,
that's right.
And then talk about dating.
Some it's been different, and some it's been different for a couple of reasons. One is 2 weeks is different than 1 week. Second, there is a level of high expectations that Summit has always put on students, that they can care about things that matter, that they've got the capacity to think through those things at a deep level, that they don't just want fun and games, but actually want to take seriously some of these ideas that are so important in life and culture, and to do that as a community with others that really care. And you put all that together. Summit uses this phrase, truth in relationships, and that relationships things needs to be really unpacked to see kind of the various levels that it operates at in a 2-week summit conference. But it really is a powerful thing. I mean, to go to the marriage thing, there is a lot of folks that have met their life partner, their spouse at a summit conference, and part of that is where else do you find people with that same level of passion and concern as others? Yeah, I mean, honestly, I met my wife through Summit, so there you go. But Summit's a wonderful program, and the stats are really great. We know how hard it is to pass our faith to the next generation. And that would be tough if there weren't, as I put it in the commentary, these strong cultural headwinds. But there are. And these cultural headwinds aren't just kind of moral challenges like temptations, salacious sort of, images and temptations. There are these fundamentally embedded ideas about life in the world that can pull one away from a deep commitment to Christ, much less a life of kind of moral high ground. And Summit hits those ideas head on. And what we see in the long term is that it does. I mean, you have a level of commitment to the church that you don't see in non-Summit students. You have a commitment you have a confidence in being able to communicate about one's faith and even defend it that rises by like 35%, among students who attend. And if you went down the line and said, well, how much did you know about the reliability of Scripture, or God's design for marriage, or how to talk about these difficult cultural issues in public from a Christian perspective. If you went down those individual lines, the confidence level would just be off the charts. And it's really because Summit's willing to have those tough conversations, and they're willing to actually address it head on. One of the things I appreciate, I don't set up straw men when I speak on what I do. I want students to have the very, very best information, including the best arguments from the other side. What we pointed to is a fascinating study. I've been using this study in talks for years by a guy named Will McGuire, who's a psychologist back in the 50s. And he was trying to figure out how people get brainwashed, how people change their views, what makes ideas sticky. And so, the experiment which is highly unethical and probably you couldn't pull it off today, was to take a group of college sophomores, because they're always the guinea pigs, and to tell them something that was obviously not true, and to see how many you could get to buy into it. Now, it was pretty innocuous. One of the things that he tried to convince them of was brushing your teeth was bad for you. So he brought in this kind of expert in a white coat to talk about how, I know you've always heard about brushing your teeth being good for you, but it's not, and gave these, reasons for it. And then the measure was how many believed him at the end. And it was fascinating. They divided this larger group up into 5 subgroups. And, for example, one group that was given no preparation at all, they just were sent in blind to hear this guy give these ideas they never heard before. They were pretty vulnerable. A group that was, basically warned that this is what you're about to hear. They were a little bit more stable. But the most vulnerable group was fascinating. It was not the group that was sent in blind. It was the group that was sent in with the strategy that so many Christian parents and youth groups use, which is positive reinforcement. Now, this is true. Trust us. This is true. Isn't this important to you? Didn't this make a big difference in your life? But in other words, never address counter arguments, but was, in other words, when they got in there, and this is an interesting point, many of them, what do you think, when they were given positive reinforcement and then heard this expert spout these ideas that seemed really credible that they had never heard before, it wasn't just that they were convinced by the arguments, it was that they felt deceived. Why haven't I ever heard this before?
I think there's got to be a huge factor here. This goes back to Summit as well, of there's only so much you'll accept from your parents. At some point, especially when you're in that age group, you've got to hear someone who's not your mom or dad tell you. And
I think that's huge, yeah.
I think that's just a part of growing up. I mean, my mom could tell me something 400 times and I wouldn't believe her. And then if somebody else said it, I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. So. And to be clear, like there's a bunch of organizations that are doing really good stuff. Summit was kind of the grandfather of them all. Chuck Colson called it the gold standard. Our friends over at Impact 360 have a wonderful 2-week program called Immersion. We are one of my kids has gone to that, and it's a tremendous program. It's very similar to Summit in a lot of ways. It's smaller, so they're already full for the summer, and you can't really sign up, but it's terrific. Worldview Academy, if you have students that are younger, Summit caters to like 16 and up, but Worldview Academy is great. I mean, 13, 14 years old. This is only a 1-week program, but they take seriously these ideas. And in fact, if you go back to that William McGuire study, the group that did the best by talking about maintaining their beliefs was the group that was told what was going to happen to them, given a couple of the reasons that the guy was going to use and how to refute those reasons. And then they were told, but there may be other reasons. We don't know all of them. So you need to be prepared. You need to think for yourself. And in other words, it was almost, here's a framework to think about false ideas, and here's how to refute those false ideas. And you need to now employ this on your own, not just, trust us. That group maintained their belief at a really, really high rate. And that's really what Summit does. That's what Summit does. It gives you a framework to navigate the ideas. That's what Worldview Academy and these guys do. So I'm just a huge fan of what they do. And I just know so many parents who are just grateful. I mean, it's not a money back guarantee. There are students that have gone through that and, still have walked away from this or that or the other. But it is a great toolkit. This doesn't take the place of parenting well, but it's a great tool in the tool belt.
We'll be right back with more BreakPoint this week.
Christians in America can't have a cultural impact without restoring the church through the recovery of the wisdom that we've lost. If we're to endure the crises of the 21st century with hope, the renewal of our minds and a fully formed Christian faith, well, they're not optional. They are the call of every serious believer who longs to seek first the kingdom of God. And the Colson Fellows is an on-ramp to doing this. The Colson Fellows are a diverse group. They're a courageous community of Christians. They're corporate CEOs and university professors. They're homeschool moms, teachers, pastors, ministry leaders. They're people that go to church. They're you and me. And they're all pursuing God's glory in every area of life. We're accepting applications for the new 2022-2023 Colson Fellows term. It's a 10-month deep dive into Christian worldview that's guided by peers and leaders to help you build a 3-year ministry vision for your location to equip you to stand in this time and in this place with Christian conviction and Christian love. For more information on the Colson Fellows program, visit our website at colsonfellows.org. Again, that's colsonfellows.org.
We're back on BreakPoint this week. John, I want to turn now to a situation we talked about a little bit last week, but obviously this is a situation that's changing every day. That's the escalating tension between Russia and Ukraine. Russia obviously is poised to invade Ukraine. They've amassed troops all along the border in several areas of the border with Ukraine, but also in Belarus. Tensions are high. There were some weird media reports in the West this week that there was going to be a Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 16th, which was just sort of strange because it felt like the Western media just kind of accepted that and ran with it without questioning where that intelligence came from, because we never quite heard. It was like there's U.S. intelligence officials, and maybe they heard it from Russian officials, which begs the question, why would we believe Russian officials? Like, why would they broadcast the day they were going to invade, sort of thing? Needless to say, that day came and went, and they didn't invade, thankfully, but that was kind of a strange event in the midst of this whole thing, because then the Kremlin and Russian officials were sort of mocking Western media for reporting over and over again that it was going to happen on February 16th. President Biden does say that he believes an invasion is still imminent. Ukraine seems to be preparing for that as well. So tensions are high. And then, of course, there was reports this week as well. We're recording this on Friday morning, and I believe it was either last night or yesterday morning that Russian troops allegedly were shelling an area of eastern Ukraine across the border into a school, I believe. I think a couple of adults were hurt, but I haven't seen any reports that children were hurt. But the president of the United States and other officials are warning that this could be evidence that Russia is going to pursue what's referred to as a false flag operation. So in other words, they're going to do something with casualties or some sort of damage in Ukraine that they could plausibly blame Ukraine for, and then use that as a pretext for invasion. So there's a lot going on here. We talked a little bit last week just sort of about the geopolitical situation and some of the history of that. And you pointed out, this idea that Putin kind of views Ukraine as a part of Russia, or at least in the way that he's talking about this. And defending his actions. He's suggesting that this is sort of a righteous recapturing of Russian land, or it would be. And there's definitely a religious component to that. I was doing some reading this week. There was a story in Yahoo News, actually, that was just talking about that, the Russian Orthodox Church is a powerful institution in Russia, but also somewhat in Ukraine. So after the fall of the USSR, some of the Orthodox churches in Ukraine broke away from the Russian Orthodox Church, and I believe they call themselves, obviously this is translated, but the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And then there are other Orthodox churches in Ukraine that still consider themselves part of the Russian Orthodox Church and under that authority. And of course, Vladimir Putin has been no stranger to the Russian Orthodox Church and has used them as a tool of propaganda, as an ally with some of his maneuverings in Russia. So there's definitely a religious component here. I was wondering if you could talk us through that. What sort of religious undertones are playing a role in the situation right now?
Oh, there's so much here. I mean, we remember that when the Soviet Union fell, evangelical groups also rushed in as they do, right? They run into the brokenness and started schools. I mean, the World Magazine had a story of a radio station. So you have this longstanding set of churches that are identified with either the Russian Orthodox Church, or some have created the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, where you have these kind of nationalistic churches. They have played an enormously important role in the history of the Soviet Union, the history of persecution there. There was conflict when these evangelical groups rushed in the 80s to bring evangelical schools and churches and radio stations and all the things that come along with evangelicalism. So there's a religious component to this, but not only in the present, there's a longstanding religious history to this. And what you have here, it's so hard, I think, for the West to really understand really what's happening for two reasons. Number one is we as secularists, and I think it's safe to say we see through secularist eyes. Even many Christians tend to think like secularists with a twist. Then there are two things that get downplayed. Number one is secularists think about reality in terms of the present and the future. There's a long march towards, progress. There's a long arc of freedom and justice, as President Biden said, quoting President Obama. There's this kind of imminent, kind of utopian future that's going to be ushered in with our new thinking, new ideas, new methods, new techniques. I'm not saying that secularists never think about history. I'm just thinking that a secular worldview downplays history. And boy, you can't understand, this region and these conflicts without understanding history. We've been working for a couple weeks on a set of commentaries to just walk through some of that history. And it is long and it is complicated. Where did Ukraine come from? Ukraine itself was kind of divvied up for years between Russia on one side and Eastern Europe, on the other, Poland and other countries. And so what did that do to shape this? Who belongs to who? Putin clearly sees this in historical terms. He clearly sees the need to conquer Ukraine again as part of this kind of correcting a mistake of history. We can't think that way. And even as you were talking about, what the media got wrong, and I think they admitted they got wrong. I don't think it was like anything nefarious where they were basically there was a telegraph of this is when it's going to happen from intelligence, that this is when Russia's going to invade, which if Putin says this is when it's going to happen, you can almost guarantee it's not when it's going to happen because that's just not how he does military stuff. In fact, while you were, walking through that whole thing, I was checking the headlines to make sure that it didn't happen right now because it does seem imminent. This is the largest buildup since, on a national border, for years. And it just continues to grow, even though Russia is claiming that they're de-escalating these troops. There's no evidence of that. So let me go back. So there's, one aspect of this that we tend to have a hard time to understand as a secularist society. And I don't mean like intentionally secularist. I mean like kind of practical atheist, just kind of getting with the secularist agenda. We just kind of think that way. The other thing that we downplay are the religious implications here and the struggle that has happened throughout Europe of kind of religious identifications with nations and the problems that causes. There's a long religious history here. A group of Christians in the Ukraine that have experienced persecution for years, a strong Russian-identified church. And then the confusion that creates now that you have somebody like Vladimir Putin who has very clearly taken steps to co-opt the Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, look, this just goes on and on. I mean, there is so much to this. The other thing, though, that's worth talking about, and President Biden said this week in I think in a news conference, he said that will Americans send troops? And basically just said all but no. And he said the reason is not. And he said not even to get Americans out of the Ukraine. That's a stunning thing to say. We will not do it. And he said it up front because what he said, though, I think is right. The moment that American troops confront Russian troops, you have another world war. These are the sorts of triggers. And I know we don't think like this, but you look back at World War I, World War II, and what triggered these events that then just kind of escalated out of control. This is the kind of thing that did. Now, obviously, Putin is the aggressor here. I hope we can, get him to stand down on a number of levels. But as important as what Putin decides is what the rest of the world decides. When you talk about just war theory, is your cause just? And then the second question is how do you mitigate damage? Like, how do you talk about the difference between civilian casualties? And that's all part of this. And can you actually achieve an objective? Those are difficult things to predict in just war theory. And this one could quickly get out of control. It'll
be really interesting to see. I think part of this conflict comes down to or involves nationalism. And that's something that in the West, and certainly in the United States, we've kind of collectively decided is a bad thing. You're not supposed to feel any sort of nationalistic pride or fidelity, And because I think the fear is that if you do, then you're suggesting that you are like morally superior, you're worth more than someone who's not from your country. But in this case, this obviously involves that's almost the entirety of the motivation by Putin. As you said, he wants to correct this error. He has always considered Ukraine to be a part of Russia, and this is about protecting, Russia's homeland. Whereas there's a nationalism on the part of Ukraine as well that is clearly motivating people to fight against that invasion for that reason. And if something were to happen on a global scale, people will have to wrestle with that question in their own countries. What does it mean to get involved, and in what way, and how much should we get involved, and that sort of thing. I think that we've had such a strange conversation about nationalism in the U.S. over the past several years. It'll be interesting to see what a conflict like this does to that conversation.
Well, yeah, I doubt that everyone is a student of history, but there is something about cultures that value history versus cultures that, always think innovation and next step and improvement and efficiency and all that. And there are cultures where history is much more alive. I mean, you can even see that going from one part of America to another part of America. And there's certainly a much stronger tie there. And I think I said this last week, but I do think that, going back and looking at Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilization thesis and saying, okay, how does this need to be updated? What's this reaction to kind of civilizational identity, back to nationalistic identity? But in a real sense, there's a civilizational fault line here between the Ukrainians and the Russians. It's less distinct than if it was based on ethnicity or Islam, an Islamic society versus a Christian one or something like that. But it's still, there's still civilizational differences here and national identities that we struggle to think with. And I don't think we understand just kind of how much it changes us that we have the ability to critique our own government, that we have the ability to really critique our own society. And we do it sometimes ridiculously and foolishly and over and over and over. But it does something to us, I think both good and bad. And it just means it's a completely different situation. So it's a hard thing to understand, but this is potentially a global event that's about to take place. This is going to involve everyone eventually in some way or another. And whether we can navigate it, again, I'll say it, if Putin makes the first step here, that matters. What the rest of the world does with the second and third step is going to be just as important. I had somebody email me this week. I get frequent emails from this person and, thinking that we're not hard enough on the progressives and the liberals and things like that. And
it was me. You can say it was me. No, I'm just kidding.
It was not you. But the language was so stunning. This is the end. This is the apocalypse. And all the proof that this person has ever sent me for this way of thinking is political stuff. It has to do with America, as if the end of America is the end of the kingdom of God. And the mixing of categories is just striking. And I understand, this person cares deeply, and I really appreciate it. And it's just an inappropriate way to think about the church. It's just not a theologically sound way to think about America. On the other hand, calling anything that is remotely political or nationalistic, this new nationalism, and equating it with white supremacy and danger, which we're hearing now as a critique, not only from those on the left, but we continue to hear it from, a lot of Christian voices right now in ways that are just analytically just poor. There's been an ongoing conversation between Kevin DeYoung and David French. And of course, David's one of those who is critiquing Christian nationalism right now over and over and over and over. And Kevin DeYoung, responding and saying, it sounds an awful lot like, anybody that says, my kids shouldn't be subjected to, drag queen story hours and, what should I tell my friends whose daughters won't drink anything before going to school because they don't want to go to the restroom because boys are in there now and things like that. You're saying anybody that says this is a real problem is now a white nationalist. And, there's not the level of clarity. And I go back to something that Father Richard John Newhouse wrote years ago before he passed away, in which he said, when I meet God, I expect to meet him as an American. And he got in a lot of trouble for writing that line because people didn't understand it. But in the context of the whole thing, he just says, look, God determines our time and place. So my identity is not only that I'm American, but it's not less than I'm American. And this is something that God selected for me, not something that I did. And to take seriously the stewardship of my national identity matters. this goes to Hans Scholl, who was the brother of Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl was the leader, Hans Scholl was the leader of a group of German students who resisted Hitler. And Stephen Garber tells their story in The Fabric of Faithfulness, and he kind of gives Hans Scholl a motto, I'm Christian and I'm German, therefore I'm responsible for Germany. That there was some sort of understanding that being Christian and being in a time and place implied a stewardship, and in that case, a resistance. I don't think we can, fault Ukrainians for being Ukrainian. It gets more difficult when you're talking about the aggressor like Russia or Germany. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrestled with stewardship of the moment, and which led him to actively oppose Hitler. But his former seminary students that had been co-opted and drafted into the German army, he told them to serve in the same way that Jesus didn't tell people to quit the army, and neither did Paul. So this is a really hard thing to navigate. And right now, I don't think we have the theological categories to really think it through. On one hand, to equate the kingdom of God with the American political system is completely inappropriate. On the other hand, to say any involvement in politics or care of politics is nationalism is completely inappropriate. And to accuse people who actually do vote their conscience and do whatever as being kind of guilty of, kind of a Flight 93 panic. This is not true of many people. And I tell you, the impoverished state of our discourse about what it means to be a citizen becomes obvious when you start talking about war, when you start talking about something like Russia and Ukraine. It just feels like whatever we're trying to grasp to make our analysis is just not enough.
It's scary. You just wonder if there ever was a real imminent threat to the United States, if we'd be allowed to suggest that nationalism should play a role in our motivation to defend the country. It would just be...
I think it's worse than that. I think it's not only if there's a threat is there a live threat right now that we're not recognizing because of our allergy to anything that sounds like nationalism?
Gosh. You know what I thought was weird this week? Though I was thinking about this and just watching the Super Bowl, and obviously LA won. And it's kind of weird culturally that we have this allergy to anything that smells like nationalism or that we can claim as nationalism. But you're supposed to, it's cool to be like super proud of your city and to be like, oh man, this is part of your identity that you're from that city. That seems like a weird cognitive dissonance to me that I don't quite understand. I don't think we've thought that through very well. But a lot of people really proud to live in LA, which is its own issue because I don't know why you'd be proud to be from LA, but that's a whole other issue. Maybe they have...
LA has its bright spots.
Maybe their parking structures around their stadium are better than Cincinnati's, which I'm happy to applaud.
If you're guessing that LA traffic is better than Cincinnati traffic,
I'm probably not right.
That's probably not the case.
That's fair.
Probably not the case. But no, but there is certainly a local identification that is stronger for many than the national one. And in some ways, that's the strength of the American experiment, is that it created room for that. On the other hand, there's a real disdain. It doesn't take long in political discourse to start, punting to people clinging to their God and guns and, equating that with entire geographic regions of the country, talking about for example, the racial history of the South, which was awful, particularly in places like Mississippi, but ignoring places like, Idaho and Minnesota, where it was also bad. And no offense, Wayne. And but there is this idea that we're less fallen, here in the North and the South, and in the South we're less fallen than in the North.
Well, John, let's take another break. We'll be right back with more BreakPoint this week.
We know what we're saved from. But what are we saved for? Redemption isn't for some future time. It's for right here and right now. And we want to invite you to Wilberforce Weekend 2022. You'll hear dozens of speakers who will share inspiring, personal stories of redemption. And attendees can participate in insightful panel discussions with Q&A opportunities. There will be a special screening for the new C.S. Lewis movie, The Most Reluctant Convert. It will be hosted by director Max McLean. We'll also spend some time reflecting on the conversion and life of our founder, Chuck Colson. You'll hear from Ryan Baumbarger, Rachel Gilson, Max McLean, Jennifer Patterson, Virginia Prodan, Dan Ritchie, Joni Erickson Tada, John Stonestreet, and many more expert speakers who will discuss this topic of the life redeemed. Wilberforce Weekend 2022 will be held in Orlando, Florida on May 13th to the 15th. For more information, visit wilberforceweekend.org.
We're back on BreakPoint this week. John, I want to pivot now and talk a little bit about, this was a commentary that you shared this week that you wrote alongside Tim Padgett, but there's a bigger conversation happening now around this issue as well. You guys were talking about church in the metaverse or virtual reality church. So obviously we've talked some here at the Colson Center about Facebook or Meta or whatever they're calling themselves now. It's sort of like giving yourself a nickname where it's like, we've known you as Facebook for so long. You want us to call you something different. There's just something.
And you're like, call me Meta.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, dude, take it down a notch. I'm going to call you Face.
Yeah. It's like when you remember in junior high when that guy came in and he just had a new hairstyle and you're like, hey man, what's up, Jim? He's like, call me Jimbo.
And all the kids are like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm absolutely not going to. You do not give yourself a nickname. Okay, so I'm going to call.
No, nicknames are given. They're given. You don't get to claim one.
Exactly right. I'm so glad we agree on that. Okay, so I'm going to call them Facebook. Facebook decided to call themselves Meta, and they're hoping that you'll fall in. But they're in the metaverse now, which I have to confess I didn't realize was like already a reality in some sectors. I thought it was still theoretical, but apparently it exists somewhere that I'm not going to go. But churches have already jumped on board. Apparently there is already at least one church that considers itself a purely metaverse church, so no physical location, but this is where people can meet online and have church services and whatever else. But you and Tim were kind of going through and talking about this is important because, and I loved that you referenced that a lot of times how we talk about things like this is we use the phrase, we need to meet people where they're at. And that just seems like such a fraught phrase for so many reasons. I understand the motivation behind it, and I totally resonate with it, and I appreciate it. That when we're talking about evangelism or building Christian community, it is important to not segregate into, you can only be a part of our church community if you already look this way culturally, right? That we're going to be open-minded and have open doors to people from all sorts of backgrounds and in all sorts of life situations. I get that. But what I thought was really helpful was you guys pointing out that the way you reach someone, whether it's through evangelism or, a step further in building actual Christian community, the way you reach someone says something about what you're reaching them to. So in other words, if you use purely digital marketing or a purely digital church space to meet someone and they respond to it, they're responding in part to that medium, right? They like the medium that you showed them. And so to suggest like, okay, we reached you through this digital way, but now we expect you to show up physically and we expect you to do all this kind of dirty work of like meeting people in their homes and bringing meals when they need them and visiting people in the hospital. It would almost feel like a bait and switch, I would think, at that point. It's like you communicated to me at the front end that I could do this in my sweatpants from my couch, and now you're saying it involves all these other things. I can imagine that would be a hurdle. At the same time, I don't think you guys were suggesting that it's all bad, that we need to be Luddites. We talked about that last week where we just eschew all technology altogether. But do you think this will be a growing problem as Facebook/Meta continues to increase its footprint culturally?
Yeah, I think it's times like these, we have to start with the end in mind and we have to start with really clear definitions. And that's not something that has always happened for churches as they've embraced new technologies. To be really clear on what do we mean by the church and what is the church? I love, anytime that a conversation here can take us back to a wonderful T.S. Eliot idea that before you know what you should do with something, you should know what that something is for. And it's a framework that comes out of an article he wrote on, an essay he wrote on education, that before you know what it means to educate and how to do education, you need to know what education is for and therefore what humanity is for. Same thing is true here. We tend to evaluate new technologies on purely pragmatic measurements. And you need to know if it's working, but you need to know if it's working for what. And that requires defining really carefully kind of who we are. So, for example, this is nothing new. Churches running into the metaverse, and I think the metaverse is a construction project. I think it actually refers more to what's trying to be built, and so you can invite you can call what you do as a church the metaverse without necessarily being in Facebook's version of it or whatever. You're just kind of creating either virtual reality or whatever. But the point is that Christians have embraced technology from the very beginning. Evangelicals in particular. Evangelicals are the quickest to do this always. You can start with newspapers. You can go back to even before that to the printing press. And this was a way of taking the gospel forward. And in each stage of this was really, really powerful. You can go to radio, you can go to television, you can go to the internet, you can go to TikTok, and now we have the meta, virtual reality. But you can't ask technology to do more than it's designed to do. And if the church, for example, is a bunch of redeemed humans gathered together, called out and gathered together to be sent out into the world, then and to be human is to have a body, then online digital technology can't replace that. It doesn't mean that it's pointless. It doesn't mean that it's not a great way to go reach people. Go reach people. Use it all. Spread the gospel. Just don't compromise the gospel message. I think that there is a real challenge of what you win them with, you win them to. Now, how you use TikTok will determine whether you won them with TikTok or whether TikTok was one part of thing that you're pulling them into, and now it's really clear. In other words, I think there's a way to do this well. I think there's a way to do this right. It just concerns me when someone goes completely virtual and then calls that church. I mean, maybe call it church for pragmatic lines, but a bunch of people's avatars who never see each other, never know each other, never can serve each other in real ways. That's not the church. Maybe it's a marketing thing and that's okay. But what you then bring them into, and look, I get it. It can be efficient. You can get people to respond. I'm a big fan of the work. A good friend, I won't say his name, but for years developed search engine optimization on about 1,000 different questions that people might Google, from is the Bible true to Darwin's, Darwinian theory of evolution to how to commit suicide, and intentionally populated in the top 5 results on Google a way to share the gospel, and hundreds were coming to Christ daily. And he was able then to create this whole system where they could then be connected with and churches and that, mobilize volunteers. It was a remarkable project. But he was winning them with an answer to a question, but he was winning them to deeper connection and discipleship and next steps. And it was very, very intentional. What is being called metaverse by some is a replacement for having to get up, having to go anywhere. And it's like, you remember WALL-E. It's kind of like WALL-E, the movie. This is the kind of fat, happy Christian you're going to be. And that doesn't look like a biblical definition of the church. Doesn't look like redeemed humans being called out, gathered together to be sent out. And in other words, if the metaverse church is a way of fulfilling that go and tell mission that God has given the church, then okay, I'm all for it. If it is a replacement, come and see how cool we are, then that, and we'll give you something just where you are. The gospel does meet you just where you are, but it doesn't leave you that way. That's the key. That is the key. No matter, you want to have a drug addict church to reach drug addicts, go for it and do it, because redeemed drug addicts are redeemed sinners like the rest of us, and God bless them. But you don't meet them where they are and then leave them there. That's not what Jesus ever does. And the same thing is true here, I think. So I have a mixed thought on it. I think there's wonderful innovation and opportunity here. I also think that there's a real danger whenever we replace what are essentials of the church. And And essentials of the church are not less than essentials of what it means to be humans. And we do have bodies, and that those bodies matter.
That's what's so hard about this is that people respond, and God knows this about us because he made us, but people respond to the gospel in different ways. In other words, some people are convinced by one thing and some people are convinced by something else. I feel like if I was approached by a virtual reality church, I would not respond well, but someone else might respond well. So it's complicated to think about, but one of the things I thought was interesting about the response to this, you guys referenced a piece by Tish Harrison Warren in the New York Times where she wrote about that, it's time for churches. She wasn't even talking about virtual reality church, but she was talking about churches in the wake of the pandemic who were still meeting exclusively online and kind of encouraging churches to think about going back to in-person services. And she was really, really, she had a really big negative reaction to that. People were suggesting that she was ignoring people who were vulnerable to the virus or who have disabilities or for whom meeting in person is more difficult. The weird thing about that response, though, to me, is that those are exactly the people who are going to suffer the most by a disembodied church, because those are the people who need embodied care and help. Right. And it's not as if doing church online just says, if you're, immunocompromised or especially vulnerable, you can stay home or you can engage with the church in this way. Doing church online suggests to everyone that they can and maybe should do church that way too. So now the people who could visit those who are shut-ins, for example, are not as encouraged to do it because they're being told implicitly or explicitly that church is watching something. Churches come and see as opposed to go and do, like you said. So I thought that was a strange response. I think I understand the motivation behind it, but it doesn't quite fit with the reality of the situation in my mind.
I was stunned to look at the reactions to that piece. She made a very strong argument, from the theological categories that she's coming from. And look, I have theological differences with Tish Harrison Warren on a number of issues, just in terms of church polity and things like that. But what she was writing from was an embodied vision of humanity and an embodied vision of the gospel. And just that was so unhearable to so many, and to the extent that it led people to accuse her of hate, classism. Some of it was just ridiculous, wanting people to die. Obviously, we can all agree that people haven't necessarily thought clearly through the pandemic, particularly online. But this is just really interesting to read in there kind of nefarious motives. And you just realize this is unhearable for a lot of people. And of course, it's always interesting. I brought this up this week in a group of educators I was working with. I was like, it just never ceases to surprise me how, non-Christians are so clear what Jesus would do. They just, really certain they know Jesus would have wanted us to stay online forever, but she makes a really interesting thing. I don't know that I would agree that, we shouldn't have any sort of online option. I think that this is a way that churches have always tried to be, visit the shut-in and be able to bring them into it. And I don't think it's enough, or it's enough in and of itself, but it can be a very, very helpful tool. But this is the trick of technology all the time. Technology always is a tool that becomes a theory of everything. It's always a tool that helps you solve a problem, but then becomes, the reality in and of itself. And we always have to keep that straight. This past week in a point commentary, Casey Leander wrote, he quoted Churchill, says, we ride on our roads and then our roads ride on us. And there's various versions of that, including about railroads and things like that. In other words, our technologies shape us, and we need to know how.
But that's what's so hard is it's almost impossible to know how until it's been around for a really long time, and we can study it. Don't you think? We can guess. Yes. We can make educated guesses. We can see some of the more immediate effects, but
there's one thing that gets in the way. Like, I think, no, we can't predict it perfectly. But our guesses at this point are not only educated, they're pretty well informed. I think what gets in the way of our ability to predict is what Friedrich Nietzsche called a technological arrogance. In other words, and you hear this all the time. We've talked about this with CRISPR technology. I know, those eugenicists happened in the past, but we're morally superior. Our illusion, this is another secularist kind of, we talked about, how secularism and kind of that secularist impulse shapes our view of, or help keeps us from really thinking through things like the Russia and Ukraine issue. We have this thought of being morally superior somehow because we're technologically advanced. This is a very common thing. Like, oh yeah, I know that those guys, killed millions because of their technology, but we won't. Ding, But there's no reason for us to think that way. So, in other words, we get in our own way in our ability to predict the future.
Oh, well, you've scared me with the threat of global war. You're definitely scaring me now with this. So I told you I was grumpy at the beginning of the show, but now I'm pretty sure I'm just going to go get in bed after this. So thanks, bud. Let's move now and talk about recommendations. Maybe you have something that will make me feel more chipper. Do you have a nice book for me to read or a movie for me to watch?
No, I have an article, not for you to read, but an article for everybody else to read, which was your article in Christianity Today was a fascinating conversation we've been having for a really long time about what is the right way to handle women who are pregnant and become incarcerated, go to prison, and even give birth, and what happens to their children. And there's a remarkable story. It has been disrupted because of the pandemic, but of a group of Mennonite women down near Canyon City, which is a place, if you know about Colorado, where the Supermax facility is and a women's prison, and there's a bunch of facilities down there. But they have made a wonderful ministry out of caring for these children while their moms are incarcerated, and then also finding ways to reconnect them with their moms. And that's not something the justice system has done well. As one person put it in, that you quoted in the article, sometimes the way that we treat, I think it was Mary Hassan, right, from the EPPC, the way we treat pregnant women and women who are giving birth in prison is barbaric. And if you take that a little bit further to, the gender confusion in prisons, which I think will become part of this story very, very soon. We just haven't thought this through well. And your piece highlighted wonderful work by our friends at Prison Fellowship, wonderful work by this group of Mennonite women. It was a really long piece, and I think Chuck Colson would have loved it.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, it was hard. It was hard to write. It was heartbreaking. And, you mentioned Mary talking about it being barbaric, the way that women are treated in prison. And one of the sad things I found was it's not so much that, prison facilities or corrections officials are like intentionally spiteful or hateful towards women in prison. It's that we just don't have any policies in place for this sort of thing. The number of women in prison has been exploding for the past couple of decades, whereas policies around what to do with women in prison, in particular pregnant women, have just not changed at all. There's just no policies in place for it. And that is untenable. We can't keep that up. We've got to make some changes there. Thank you. That was really a sweet recommendation. That does put me in a better mood. So yeah, that's in the March issue of Christianity Today. It is online right now. It's behind a paywall, but you can view the whole thing in the print edition as well. But I'm going to shift gears and recommend, for Valentine's Day this week, Aaron and I went to see some live music. We went to see a band called Punch Brothers, which is one of our favorite bands. And I know I have a rocky track record of encouraging you to go see or listen to or watch movies or listen to music, but I super hope that after this episode, you go listen to Punch Brothers. I want to say they're bluegrass, except I don't really like bluegrass. I feel like they're maybe more pop bluegrass, except I don't think either of those words really do them justice. So it's 5 musicians. There's an upright bass, a banjo, a guitar, a mandolin, and a fiddle. And these guys are all like classically trained, top of their game musicians. And watching them play, like I mean watching and hearing, watching the way they move their hands and all the things they do. Not to be cliche, but it truly makes me praise the Lord, like that he made people with this kind of talent that can think about music in this way. So there's 5 musicians. They're playing music that is beautiful to hear, but you could watch them and realize that like they're all playing a song that somehow works together, and they're all in like 3 different time signatures. It's just incredible. I actually was thinking, you've talked a lot about the Tower of Babel recently and how, you know, that profound verse where God basically says, we need to confuse their language, otherwise nothing that comes into their mind, they won't be able to do. Like men and women are capable of anything. And I'm sitting there watching Punch Brothers on Monday night, and I'm like, God used music as an exception. He was like, I'm going to let them just reach the highest highs in terms of innovation and talent in music. And I might be overselling Punch Brothers at this point, but I don't think I am. They're just so incredible and beautiful. If you want to start with a romantic song for Valentine's Day, I recommend the song Julep. They also have an entire album that's like a concept album about what our technology has done to us and our relationships with each other. The front man of Punch Brothers, Chris Thiele, who's also in another band I love called Nickel Creek, he won the MacArthur Genius Grant a couple of years ago. So it's the music, it's the technical side of the music, and it's the lyrics. They're all beautiful and incredible and fun to watch. So that's my recommendation. Go see some live music if you can, and definitely check out Punch Brothers. Well, John, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for listening to BreakPoint this week. As always, you can find links to the stories we're talking about today, as well as other commentaries and resources at breakpoint.org. You can also find information there about our upcoming Wilberforce weekend, which we're getting really excited about. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. I'm Maria Baer alongside John Stonestreet from the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.